All right, so we're diving into some pretty intense relationship stuff today. People want to know why some men are saying they just don't value women like they used to, and on the flip side, why some women are having a tough time finding a partner.
Yeah, it's definitely a loaded topic.
I've got Blaize and Trenius' YouTube videos in the mix. They always bring the heat. And even Blaize's book, Lovers and Haters.
Yeah.
Should be interesting to see these different perspectives.
Yeah, it's like a puzzle, right? We've got all these different pieces. Got to see how they fit together.
Exactly. And Blaize, let me tell you, she jumps right in. She's saying, some men feel like women have changed. They're focused on appearances, BBLs, designers, everything.
It's like they're chasing something, right?
Totally. And she's connecting that to seeking validation from men instead of, finding it within themselves.
Interesting. So it's not just about the outward appearance, but what it represents.
Exactly. Like, is it about self-love or is it about impressing someone else? And she even went on to say it's tied to this idea of, like, wanting the finer things without necessarily putting in the work.
Ah, so there's this expectation maybe that doesn't match up with reality.
Yeah, and she even touched on some women using intimacy as leverage, which is kind of a whole other can of worms.
Definitely a complex issue with potential for, let's say, miscommunication and hurt feelings.
Big time. And Trenius, on his YouTube channel, he is on the same wavelength. He's literally saying men are leaving women behind.
Wow. Strong words.
Right. And he's blaming it on, like, this societal shift, pointing fingers at feminism and women choosing careers over families.
Okay, so he's coming at it from a more traditional viewpoint, it sounds like.
Totally. He even suggests, get this, that women are going to end up lonely and regretful, pointing to things like, declining marriage and birth rates.
Yeah, I mean, those are definitely trends, but I don't know if I'd go as far as saying women are doomed to be lonely.
Totally. And Blaize actually talks about that in her book, this idea of being equally yoked, like having shared values is super important if you want a lasting connection.
Makes sense. We got to be on the same page, right? Regardless of what these YouTubers are saying, it boils down to what you value in a partner.
Preach.
Do they share your life goals, your priorities? That's the stuff that matters long term.
It's like, are you building something together or are you building separate castles?
Exactly. And speaking of common ground, I noticed that both these YouTubers seem to agree on one thing. Guys want to feel desired.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
In fact, Stephan Speaks did a whole video about this, didn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
It's not enough to just state your own needs. You got to make the other person feel wanted.
Yeah.
He talked about compliments, flirting, really tapping into what makes your partner tick.
It's about speaking their language, right? Figuring out what makes them feel loved and appreciated.
Yeah. And you know who else was all about that?
Let me guess. Trenius?
Ding, ding, ding.
Mm-hmm.
He was saying men are starving for peace, appreciation, a partner who brings calmness, not chaos.
Interesting. So it's not just about desire, but about feeling comfortable and safe.
Yes. And he even said it's rare to see genuine couples out and about these days, which I thought was, I don't know, kind of sad.
It does make you wonder, has that easy affection just disappeared?
Right, where's the genuine connection? But, I mean, he's not wrong when he talks about how obvious that negativity can be in a relationship,
Yeah.
If you're stressed, arguing all the time, feeling unappreciated, it's going to show.
For sure. And that kind of negativity, that resentment, it just festers. Sounds like both he and Stephan Speaks are saying, hey, emotional intelligence is kind of important here.
And maybe that's what's lacking for some people. Stephan Speaks was very clear about not wasting time on men who have bad communication or disrespectful or unwilling to invest, and not just financially, emotionally too.
He's laying down the law. Those aren't just red flags. They're like neon signs.
For real. And Blaize, in her book, she echoes that. She's all about mutual respect, open communication, and that whole equally yoked concept being the foundation of any good relationship.
It's like they're all coming back to the same idea. It's not about some societal script for men and women. It's about what individuals need to flourish together. Respect, healthy communication, those are universal.
Totally. Although I will say, Trenius went there.
Yeah.
He suggested this is a modern women problem.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. Claiming they're seen as angry, bitter, judgmental, saying it makes some men hesitant to even approach them, which is a lot.
It's a pretty bold statement. And it's important to remember he's speaking from his perspective, his experience. Not every woman is like that, just like not every man wants a traditional housewife.
100%.
But it does make you think about self-awareness,
Yeah.
How are you coming across to potential partners? Does that match up with who you are and what you're looking for?
It's like, are you putting your real self out there, Or are you trying to fit into some mold of what you think you should be?
Right, because that's never going to work long term.
No.
Speaking of authenticity, Blaize had this whole thing about women leading with, like, masculine energy.
Oh, right. And she was connecting that to, like, past hurts, right? Being
Yeah.
guarded.
Yeah, like putting up walls instead of letting people in. And she even said that can make it tough for some men to, step into those more traditional masculine roles.
Interesting. So it's like this push and pull, this dance of who's leading and who's following. And are you even comfortable in those roles?
Exactly. And again, it comes back to those shifting gender roles we were talking about. Like, if both partners are trying to lead with the same energy, is there going to be a power struggle? Something's got to give, right?
Totally. And to be fair to Blaize, she wasn't saying it's wrong for women to have that masculine energy. She was actually pointing out that it often comes from a place of, like, pain.
Which makes total sense. If you've been hurt, if you've been let down, you're going to put up those guards.
It's like self-preservation almost.
Totally. It highlights just how much those past relationships, that baggage, can impact you even when you don't realize it.
Speaking of baggage, Trenius went there.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. The whole kids as pawns thing.
Oof, yeah, that's a tough one.
Intense. He's talking about women using children to, like, manipulate or control their exes.
It's a sensitive topic for sure. And, we always have to remember we're dealing with the perspectives of these YouTubers, their opinions, not necessarily, the universal truth or anything.
Of course, of course. But it was interesting to hear his take. Like, he was basically saying that kind of behavior, whether it's happening a lot or just enough to make an impact, contributes to the distrust and resentment some men feel towards, getting into another serious relationship.
It creates this fear, right? Like, if you're going into a relationship worried about losing access to your kids or facing a custody battle, I mean, I can see how that would make someone hesitant.
Totally. And he even took it a step further, suggesting that this fear is what's fueling things like, the whole passport bro phenomenon.
Interesting.
Like opting out of traditional relationships and seeking connections, in other cultures where maybe those same fears don't exist or those situations aren't as prevalent.
It's like they're saying, okay, the system isn't working. I'm going to go find something different.
Exactly. Which some people see as a positive, right? More options, more freedom. But Trenius, he's coming at it from this place of, like, men feeling disillusioned with Western women.
Yeah, he's definitely speaking from a place of maybe frustration or disappointment. Like we said, it's one viewpoint. But it does make you think, right? Like, are the challenges of modern relationships so big that they're pushing people away from these more traditional models?
Right. And is that a bad thing?
Yeah.
Is it just different? And if it is this big shift, what does that even mean for the future of, like, love and family?
Right. It's a question for the ages. But I think for the individual, it comes back to that same idea. Finding what works for you, whether it's a traditional marriage or something non-monogamous or even being single. It's about being intentional with your choices and finding something that brings you fulfillment, whatever that looks like.
100%. Now, I want to circle back to something Bill said in her book that really stuck with me. This whole self-love thing. Like, you can't expect someone to value you if you don't even value yourself first.
Oh, that's so true. I don't care who you are or what your relationship status is. If you're coming from a place of insecurity or neediness or self-doubt, it's going to impact every relationship you have.
You're projecting that energy outward. So, of course, that's what you're going to attract back to you.
Exactly. Right. So if you don't believe you're worthy of love, of respect, it's going to be really hard to find a partner who treats you that way.
Because they're picking up on those vibes.
Yeah.
So what's the answer then? More therapy.
Well, therapy's never a bad idea, but really it's about investing in yourself, boosting your self-esteem, pursuing your passions, prioritizing your own well-being. Because here's the thing, when you feel good about yourself, you become a more attractive partner.
It's like they say, fill your own cup first.
Exactly. And that includes recognizing your own worth, setting healthy boundaries.
Which Stephan speaks is all about. Like, straight up, don't waste your time on a man who isn't investing in you financially and emotionally.
Yeah. He even dropped that truth bomb, like, if he's not giving you what you need, stop giving him what he wants. Mic drop moment.
For real. And it's true.
Yeah.
You teach people how to treat you. So if you're constantly giving, and not getting anything back, it's time to reevaluate.
It has to go both ways. You can't be the only one putting in the effort, the only one making sacrifices. It's a two-way street.
Absolutely. And he was also big on pointing out those red flags early on. Bad communication, disrespect, unwillingness to spend on you. all those things.
Pay attention to those signs. Don't make excuses for bad behavior or convince yourself that they'll change. Talk about setting yourself up for disappointment.
Right. Don't waste time trying to fix someone.
Exactly. Focus your energy on finding someone who's already on a similar wavelength, someone who shares your values and treats you with respect from the jump.
Which goes back to Blaize's whole equally yoked concept again, right? Shared values, shared goals. She even suggested going into business together, which I thought was interesting.
It's definitely unconventional.
Yeah.
But I kind of love it. Like, you're not just partners in life, you're teammates. You're building something together, both personally and professionally.
And I bet that weeds out the people who aren't serious pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Like, if they can't even support your dreams, how are they going to support you through the tough stuff?
It makes you think. Like, what are your deal breakers? What are your non-negotiables? Are those things really being met?
And are you brave enough to walk away from someone who doesn't meet those standards, even if there's like a ton of attraction?
Right. Because attraction fades. Butterflies disappear. But those core values, that respect, that foundation of friendship and understanding, that's what lasts.
It's like, are you building a house on sand or on solid ground? So we've got self-love, communication, shared values, boundaries.
Yeah.
Anything else people should be thinking about?
Well, Trenius touched on something that I think a lot of people struggle with. Loneliness. And it's interesting, right? Because we live in this world where everyone's so connected online, but it feels like we're more disconnected than ever in real life.
Totally. Like, we're all so busy scrolling through everyone else's highlight reel that we forget to look up and, actually connect with the people right in front of us.
And it's like we've forgotten how to have those genuine moments. Like Trenius was saying how rare it is to just see a couple enjoying each other's company, not on their phones, not distracted, just present.
And it makes you wonder, are we so busy documenting our lives that we're forgetting to actually live them?
Right. And here's the thing about loneliness. It can make you do crazy things. Like Trinius was saying how it drives some women to settle just to have someone, anyone.
Oh, I've been there. It's like you'd rather have something than nothing, even if that something isn't really what you want.
It's a recipe for disaster. And honestly, it's better to be single and content than in a relationship that's draining you, that's not fulfilling.
100%. And Blaize actually had a lot to say about that in her book. Like, she warned against getting caught up in these, doomed karmic relationships.
Ah, yes, the ones that keep repeating the same patterns over and over.
Exactly. And she said it's so important to recognize the difference between a genuine connection, that twin flame energy, and just straight up toxic attachment, because one will bring you joy and the other will bring you years of therapy.
Seriously. And how do you tell the difference? Pay attention to those red flags, those patterns. If you're constantly attracting partners who are emotionally unavailable, disrespectful, unwilling to commit, chances are you're playing a role in that.
So it's not just them, it's you too.
It's both. It's about looking inward and asking yourself, what am I putting out there? What am I attracting? And why?
Because if you don't figure that out, you're going to keep repeating the same cycle over and over again.
Exactly. It's like that definition of insanity, right?
Yeah.
Doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
So how do you break the cycle? How do you stop attracting the same type of person?
That's where the real work begins. It's about self-awareness. It's about healing those past wounds. And it's about setting boundaries, not just with potential partners, but with everyone in your life.
Speaking of boundaries, Blaize was also big on protecting your relationship from outside influences, like what you call them, energy vampires.
Oh, yeah. Those friends or family members who just suck the joy out of everything.
Yes. And sometimes it's your own flesh and blood, which makes it even harder.
For sure. But she made a good point. Like, you have to protect your relationship. If someone is constantly negative, if they're trying to sabotage your happiness, you gotta set some boundaries.
And that means having those tough conversations, right?
Yeah.
Both with the person who's interfering and with your partner.
Absolutely. Communication is key, especially when you're dealing with external pressures. Because if you can't openly and honestly talk about those things, it's just going to create resentment and erode the trust you've built.
Okay, so we've got clear communication, shared values, respect, boundaries. Anything else? This is a lot.
It's a lot to think about, but honestly, it boils down to this. Are you getting your needs met in this relationship? Are you happy? Because if the answer is no, both Blaize and Trenius would probably agree, you're better off focusing on yourself.
It's about knowing your worth and not settling for anything less than you deserve.
Exactly.
Easier said than done, though.
Right. Oh, 100%.
Speaking of worth, Blaize had some strong opinions about, how women present themselves online. She even got on her soapbox about revealing clothing.
Right, and that ties back to her values. It's important to remember what feels empowering to one person might feel objectifying to someone else. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach here.
Totally. And she was definitely coming at it from a more like traditional standpoint, right?
Yeah.
Emphasizing modesty and inner beauty over that external validation.
Which is valid, but ultimately it comes down to the individual. How do you want to express yourself? What makes you feel confident and beautiful and attractive?
And hopefully you find a partner who appreciates that, right? Who sees you for who you are, not just how you look in a certain outfit.
Exactly. It's about finding someone who values your authenticity, your intelligence, your sense of humor, your kindness, all those qualities that make you, you.
So well said.
Yeah.
Now, Stephan Speak said something about long-term relationships that I thought was super interesting. Like, he was basically saying, you got to keep making your partner feel desired even after you've been together for a while.
Oh, for sure. It's easy to let those little things slide, right? The compliments, the date nights, the little gestures of affection. But those things matter.
Totally. Like, you got to keep that spark alive. And he talked about how important it is to like actually understand your partner's specific needs and desires, not just making assumptions about what you think they want.
Which requires communication, right? Like actually talking to each other openly and honestly about your needs, your desires, your fantasies, even your fears.
It's about being vulnerable, even when it's scary. Because sometimes you got to risk getting hurt to create that deeper connection.
100%. Vulnerability is where the magic happens. It's where true intimacy is born. Now, one thing that surprised me from Stephan Speaks' video on commitment was this idea that men might actually be more interested in marriage than women these days.
Wait, really? I thought it was the opposite.
He even cited a study, I know, right? It totally flips the script. Like, we've all heard that stereotype of men being afraid of commitment.
Commitment phobes.
Exactly. But he was suggesting that maybe it's the women who are more jaded now, you know? Like, they've been burned before. They've had those negative experiences, so they're more hesitant to jump back in.
And maybe men are holding on to that hope of finding like a true partner, a real ride or die.
It's an interesting way to look at it, and it just goes to show you can't make assumptions about gender and relationships. Everyone's different. Everyone's bringing their own experiences to the table.
Totally. Like, don't write a guy off just because you assume he's not ready to settle down. He might surprise you.
And on the flip side, don't assume that all women are desperate to get married. Some women are perfectly content with their single lives. Thank you very much.
It's about figuring out what you want, not what society tells you to want.
Exactly. And the beautiful thing is, we have more choices than ever before. We get to define what a relationship looks like for us. It doesn't have to fit into some predefined box.
So how do we navigate all these choices, all these options, without losing our minds?
Well, that brings us back to those key ingredients we've been talking about. Self-love, self-awareness, communication, boundaries, knowing your worth,
Yeah.
all of that.
It's like you got to do your own personal deep dive before you dive into a relationship.
Exactly. Figure out what you want, what you need, and what you absolutely will not tolerate.
Write your list.
Yes. Write your non-negotiables, because once you know what you stand for, it's so much easier to navigate those choppy waters of modern dating.
It's like we're all searching for that treasure, but the map's changed and nobody knows what the X even marks anymore.
Right. Like, is it a chest full of gold? Or a sense of adventure? Or maybe just like someone to share a pizza with on a Friday night? Who even knows these days?
It's wild out there.
Yeah.
But I mean, you hit the nail on the head. The map's definitely changed. It's not just about fitting into these traditional roles anymore. It's about figuring out what works for you.
100%. And it's not always easy, right? Like, we're constantly bombarded with messages about what we should want, what a successful relationship looks like.
Social media is a beast.
Tell me about it. But at the end of the day, it comes back to that individual journey. Like, what are your values? What are your non-negotiables? What makes you feel loved and respected?
And are you brave enough to ask for it? Because sometimes you got to speak up.
100%. Like
Yeah.
Stephan Speaks said, you got to communicate. And not just the surface stuff, the real deep down stuff, the needs, the desires, the fears, all of it.
Even if it makes you sweat a little bit.
Yes.
Because that's where the good stuff is,
Yeah.
right? That vulnerability, that raw honesty, that's what builds real intimacy.
Totally. And it's not always pretty, right? Relationships can be messy. But if you can find someone who's willing to get messy with you, someone who sees you, hears you, accepts you for all that you are.
That's the dream.
Right. And maybe that's what all this boils down to. Like, it's not about men versus women or tradition versus modern love. It's about finding your person, the one who gets you, the one who makes you feel seen and valued for exactly who you are.
So less about pointing fingers, more about looking in the mirror. Less about blaming societal trends, more about taking responsibility for our own happiness.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe in all that self-reflection and all that searching, we'll discover that we already have everything we need right here within ourselves.
And maybe, just maybe, that's the greatest love story of all.